Good morning. My name is Schosinsky. I am the managing director of the Avianca Cargo. Thank you for joining us today in this webinar. Thanks to everyone who is connected today to our first Avianca Cargo Pharma webinar. The main objective of this forum is to have generate today all around the vaccine. It's important to create this community and obviously put all the efforts together of the different actors that are working to guarantee the optimal delivery of the COVID-19 vaccine, which is the times come and is the worldwide delivery challenges that we are facing. Today, we have 5 panelists that we are share with us their ideas. The topics that we are discussing today is, first of all, understanding that vaccine distribution is in our region brings significant challenges that we consider collaboration between the different companies and entities that participate in the logistic change to be essential. Only through this collaboration, it's possible to plan, design solutions to ensure the vaccines timely as a safe delivery. To generate the spirit of collaborations and raise awareness in our countries, we have provided this space where important to recognize of the different representatives of the different industries present the challenges that they are facing today in the area that they are working on. Today with us, we have 5 panelists that I'm going to introduce, and thanks for joining today in this panel. The first panelist is Pauli Immonen. Pauli Immonen is an A320 pilot with a master's degree in Helsinki University. Over 20 years experience in humanitarian aviation as a pilot, flight operation manager, air operation manager, and senior aviation advisor. With 10 years experience in commercial aviation as vice president in ground operations and senior projects coordinator at Geneva International Airport. Since May 2020, he is the aviation consultant for the World Food Program with the World Health Organization in Geneva. Thanks, Mr. Pauli, for joining us today. Our second panelist is Frank Cascante. He is the Sales America head for Emballiso. He's over 22 years in logistic and freight forwarding experience and broad experience in supply chains optimization, spanning the Americas, Europe, and Asia markets. Frank has also track record of successful implementation for more responsive and reliable international supply chains. Frank, thanks for joining us today. Our third panelist is Emir Pineda. Emir is the manager aviation trade and logistics for marketing division of the Miami-Dade Aviation Department, which operates the Miami International Airport. He serves of the board of director of the International Air Cargo Association and co-chairs the joint task force made up of IATA and Pharma Aero. Is a goal to provide the logistic industry with the guidelines to the proper handling, storage, transport of the COVID-19 vaccine. He also leads the Miami Airport Cargo Community COVID-19 Task Force, which is planning for vaccine distribution locally and international from Miami. Thank you for joining us today, Emir. Our fourth panelist is Ronald Schaefer. Ronald is the Senior Principal IATA Consulting for Americas. He also head of the CIF Pharma program at IATA and responsible for validations and the CIF live animals and CIF fresh programs. Before joining IATA, Schaefer accumulated vast experience in the air transport field, working as a consultant for Lufthansa Consulting, Roland Berger Strategy Consulting, and Ferrostal in Mexico. He has worked on corporate restructuring strategy, post-merge integrations, market and competitive analysis, safety and risk management initiative, among others, in the transportation industry on all continents. Thanks, Ronald, for joining us today. Our fifth panelist is Thomas Grubb. Thank you, Thomas, for joining us. Thomas is the Global Key Account Americas at Envirotainer. He is a 30 years veteran in the air cargo industry. Grubb emphasis remains on the temperature control supply chain. He continues to build upon the experience to collaborate with the educate these different stakeholders around the globe with this critical importance of the quality through the proper handling of delicate pharmaceutical products. Thanks for all our panelists. Welcome for this first Avianca Cargo Pharma webinar. For our attendees, please raise all your questions in the chat. We'll try to answer your question during the webinar, or after the webinar, we'll try to answer all your questions. We divide our webinar in 4 blocks. In the first block, we are talking about the logistical challenge associated with the distribution of the vaccine. The second block, preparing be part of this historical challenge. And the third block, the challenge properly in Latin America. The fourth block, the last one, will be the Q&A sessions, and then we try to answer some questions. So let's start with the first block in our webinar. In the logistical challenges, I want to raise to our panelists general questions and receive their answers. The question is, what are the main challenges that you have identified from your industry or sector for the distribution of the vaccine? Pauli, if you want to start. Pauli, you're on mute, I think so.
Thank you, Kurt. Maybe to start at the global and macro level, we have a new situation worldwide. It's unique in the history that we are trying to reach the whole planet Earth with 8 billion vaccine. So this is something which have never been done before. Secondly, we are doing that challenge in a situation where the aviation industry, especially the passenger traffic, is at lower level since decade. And as we know, most of a serious part of the world cargo is going through passenger aircraft. So all that capacity is missing from the market. And this is an unprecedented situation. And maybe thirdly, this cargo is not any cargo, it's temperature controlled cargo. So that level of challenge increase even more. And finally, we have to remember that these are not boxes, these are life-saving material. And therefore, the seriousness we have to approach this logistical challenge is important. What I have identified as the critical problem is the planning. In any normal logistical situation, we know where the cargo go, when does it go, what it is, at which temperature it needs to be transported, what are the cubic meters, and what are the volumes in weight. At the moment, while the information is getting clearer and clearer, we still have serious questions about all these areas. The second area is the cold chain and the available aviation capacity. We know that currently in the market, the active solution are only available on long-haul aircraft or on dedicated cargo freighter. There is no active solution for passenger, so-called passenger freighter, or for any smaller plane like ATR or bellies of 737. So we are forced to use passive solution. And with passive solution, we have question mark about dry ice and question mark about the stability in all circumstances. And that is a major challenge, these boxes versus aircraft, because especially in remote area, using wide-body aircraft is not an option due to the impossibility to unload them, due to missing high loaders, or just simply because there is not enough wide-body capacity to reach every destination on Earth, especially in most remote countries. And the really final challenge is the question of the shipment size. Only few countries can get millions of vaccine at the same time. So the shipments by force will need to be in little amount. And again, for these little amounts, big wide-body cargo aircraft are not suitable. So I think we have enough of a challenge to start with the discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Pauli. It's a good information. Emir, do you want to share with us your point of view?
Yes, good morning, and thank you very much, Kurt and Avianca, for giving me this opportunity to speak to you this morning. There are many challenges facing the logistics industry when it comes to the distribution of the vaccine. In a survey conducted by IATA, the International Cargo Association, Pharma.Aero, as part of Project Sunrays, 8 major challenges or concerns were identified. They included temperature excursions, probably the most important factor to avoid, lack of visibility, the lack of transparency on shipment transport conditions, lack of adequate infrastructure, so no cool chain ground equipment, containers, dollies, etc. Capacity storage, meaning availability of cargo space on an aircraft or possibly airport warehouse space. Unexpected delays, a lot of it dealing with border clearance issues. End-to-end connectivity, meaning staying informed, using data loggers or not using data loggers as being an issue. Security, something very important that we need to avoid, counterfeit vaccines, for example. And lastly, cost, which is managing your resources. Now, from an airport perspective, our main challenges have mostly to do with infrastructure. Making sure we have enough airfield parking to manage the possibility of high-level charter flights is one challenge we may face. Accommodating additional truck traffic requiring additional parking and staging area is another area. And finally, taking account of our pharma cooling space is something that we need to consider. But I'd like to add one other very important thing, and that is working with the federal agencies. In our particular case here in the US, CBP and FDA, to make sure that they do not have any unnecessary delays with the clearance of the vaccine shipments at our airport. We do not want a repeat of the delays associated with the transport of the PPEs that some airports experienced back in March and April of this year. So these are some of the challenges that face an airport, as well as some of the things that the industry identified during the survey on the Project Sunrays survey. Thank you.
Thank you, Emir. It's a good information because when we identify the challenges, we have the opportunity to drive those challenges with the collaboration of the different players in the supply chains. Thank you, Emir. Frank, you want to share your thoughts?
Yes. Thank you, Avianca, for the opportunity to be a part of this panel. Some of the challenges we see within the massive technology space is that there's been significant advancements by way of phase change material, ECM, also advances in the type pallet shippers or other small range of isothermal packaging that's available in the industry. Be part of the solution as a complement the IATA solution.
Frank, sorry to interrupt you. You can hear me. Okay. Before you fix it, I tried to.
Can you hear me better now?
Not very well. I'm going to move to another panelist before you fix it, and I'm going to return with you, Frank. Sorry. Thomas, do you want to share your thoughts?
Good morning, and thank you for having me. I think, as some of my other colleagues had mentioned, the real critical challenge with planning for these vaccine distributions has been the what, when, and where. We know that there are any number of vaccines that have multiple temperature ranges that can be used for these materials, but we don't know exactly when or where they're going to come up. The transportation temperatures, as well as some of the other unknowns about exactly how these will need to be treated, have made the planning a little bit stressful. But the good news is that as the stage 3 trials have proceeded and have progressed, some of the assumptions have become a little more clear. Over the last few weeks, we've seen a couple of the leading candidates, which gives us an idea of what will be needed in terms of both temperature and of course, location is yet to be completely decided or determined. But in terms of the candidates, which will be likely the initial distributions in the coming weeks and months. So I think that's been one of the biggest challenges thus far. Now, a second component that has been mentioned is the fact that due to the reduced air flight schedules as a result of the pandemic, there is significant less availability of aircraft capacity in the markets. That obviously is a huge concern, particularly when you think, well, coupled with that capacity shortage is the fact that we have this tremendous volume of vaccines that are going to have to all basically move around the same time frame or through the same period. So I think that also is contributing to a lot of these concerns. But generally speaking, I think the planning that we've done to this point is good. You'll hear through my comments today, I'm going to be mentioning collaboration significantly. Any of you that have heard me speak before, you'll know that is a huge proponent, and I think this is a perfect example of a condition where we are going to have to work together across all of the businesses in order to make this successful.
Perfect, Thomas. And you're right, this is key, the collaboration in that time with the capacity produced, with the planning, and as Pauli mentioned, is uncertainty. We need to collaborate more closer and closer. Frank, let's try your mic.
All right, can you hear me better now?
No, we with the nose. Okay, try to fix it.
Can you hear me right now?
No. Okay.
I think proceed and I'll work on the mic to integrate in the next.
Yeah, something's wrong. And switch to Ronald, Schaefer, Frank, and until you fix your microphone. Ronald.
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much, Kurt, to you and your team for having me today. Everyone who is listening and watching, I hope you're all safe and well in these very unnormal times, crazy times. I echo a lot of the comments that were made already by my colleagues here in today's panel of some of the challenges that we're facing, and I think there are a number of them. One of my fellow colleagues here mentioned already that the connectivity and the capacity. I mean, the global route network really has been reduced dramatically over the last couple of months from a pre-COVID 22,000 city pairs. Dedicated freighter capacity is up 30%, but belly capacity is 70% down. And governments really need to start working on reestablishing air connectivity to ensure that there is enough capacity available for the vaccine distribution. We're seeing some improvements made here in the region, but we still have a long way to go.
Sorry.
Is my sound bad as well?
Frank. Go ahead, Ronald.
Yeah, okay. So the other thing is a great challenge, which is we have is the design and implementation of efficient distribution systems. I think it is really important to know where these distribution centers will be. I mean, the aviation industry will play a vital part in this, but where are they going to be? Are they going to be in big cities? Where are they going to set up regional distribution facilities in certain parts of a country? I heard actually in Germany, they were discussing that those regional distribution centers were supposed to be secret for security concerns. So where are they going to be else? Maybe near schools, near essential workers and businesses. So this is still a big question. I think a lot of the companies are still struggling with that to identify where they are. I mean, are they going to be close to an airport? That is very important for us in the industry as well. From an infrastructure standpoint, it was already highlighted by Emir and by Immo that the availability of climate-controlled facility is a big issue for inbound and outbound shipments. The land site needs to be prepared. Do we have enough trucks with climate control capacity? We all know that these vaccines will have a temperature control requirement and probably one sub-zero. So that is another challenge. With regards to the availability of the infrastructure, is it in good shape? Does it have a proper monitoring system? Are the people properly trained to handling that? Again, this is very important as well. We have seen over the years that not all the infrastructure in place is enough to store all these vaccines in the right way. There are a lot of requirements for doing that. So training for the staff will be important, and some probably upgrading of infrastructure is important as well. In addition to it, I mentioned it before, availability. Emir mentioned the survey made by IATA and Pharma. I think 45% of the organizations can handle sub-zero temperatures. What about the rest? And what about in this part of the world? What about in this region? Do we have enough infrastructure in place to actually handle these sub-zero vaccines? So big question mark here. We mentioned airport capacity. Do we have enough capacity on the apron to handle all these aircraft? At the end of the day, we're shipping 7.8 billion vaccines. We need about 8,000 747s for that. So they need to park somewhere. That's another big issue. What are the airports doing with regards to trucking access? Are there maybe some high-speed lanes in the making that will be set up? So that is another issue. The border as well, facility vaccines when they come into the country. We all know that border authorities have a right to inspect and need to inspect the merchandise. Where are they going to do these inspections? Do they have enough space for doing that? Will they implement some fast-tracking procedures here as well? Big issue. Transportation per se, some key considerations that we should not forget. International regulations. We will be shipping vaccines to different countries. There are different regulations out there. Are they all aligned? I doubt it. We have seen that over the past years, that every country has their own regulation. My colleagues will talk about the packaging. Pauli mentioned already active versus passive. The supply chain integrity is very, very important as well. The companies that are working together in this collaboration is important. Tom mentioned it, so supply chain integrity is very crucial here. Alignment of processes and standards. A lot of temperature excursions actually take place when the merchandise passes from one player in the supply chain to the other. So huge issue. And that takes me to one of the last points, and something that I've been talking about for quite a bit over the last couple of years. It's reliability. It was identified as one of the biggest issues as well. We need to have a reliant distribution chain in place, because temperature excursions can happen, they will happen, and they will render those vaccines worthless. And that will increase the cost, that will delay the vaccinations of the people who need the vaccinations. And that is a crucial point. So yeah, let's not forget, reliability is very, very important here, and everybody aligned, everybody working to the same standards and procedures will be a key element for that.
Perfect. Thank you, Ronald. Good point. I think in terms of infrastructure, we have a big challenge, because when we think in infrastructures, normally we think in the big cities or main cities in each country, but we need to deliver the vaccines for different cities around the different countries, and not necessarily all the infrastructure, not only warehouses, if not trucks with the right temperature, using the active or passive packagings is one of the challenges. Once again, I think the collaboration is key in this historical challenge that we're facing in these times. Thank you, Ronald. Franz, let's try your mic now.
Okay, let's try this again. I hope it works. Can you hear me?
It works.
All right, good. So I'll be brief for sake of the delays. Apologies to all. But collaboration is something that we see that's critical. The size of tasks that we have to distribute, be a part of the vaccines into more than 150 countries is something the likes we've never seen in the last 50 years. Coupled with that is there have been many advancements within isothermal packaging, particularly with PCM across all the industries. And there are a number of companies, not just ourselves, who have significantly made strides to be able to upgrade the performance of packaging, be that a mid-size box pallet shipper, or even something that can go inside a narrow body aircraft, anywhere between a 50-liter to a 90-liter one. These advancements are critical, and they need to get out to the marketplaces as quickly as possible. What we're seeing is an urgent need to proliferate this know-how, this data of the increased performance across the packaging spectrum, and get it into the hands of the authorities, of the freight forwarders, the airlines, the airports. That's one of the challenges that we see. Hence, it's so important, this type of event, because it is the launching or the deployment of that need of interdisciplinary collaboration that is needed as quickly as possible and faster than we think. So, thank you.
Thanks. And you're right. The discipline to guarantee the flow and the time in the process would be active. As Ronald as well mentioned, the collaboration, the cross-border to be more agile to enter the vaccines in the countries will be a key in this process. Okay, thank you for the panelists for this first block. Let's jump to the second block of our webinar. And the second block of the webinar is preparing to be part of these historical challenges. In this, we are talking about planning, basically in terms of prioritization, collaboration, etc. We have a different question for each panelist. I want to start with Pauli. Pauli, and in these preparations, how are the different programs and units of the United Nations preparing to fulfill these great missions at this time?
At the moment, all the relevant UN agencies are planning and working on the vaccine program to start. So the United Nations units which are dealing with that is, of course, ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization, and it's good to be reminded that there is lots of international regulation which already applied also for the current pandemic, which just need to be followed. The second important organization is, of course, the World Health Organization. So ICAO is in Montreal, the World Health Organization based in Geneva, which is responsible for health-related issues. Then you have UNICEF, which is based, the logistic center, competence center, especially in Copenhagen. And UNICEF is the UN agency responsible for children, but has historically also been the agency responsible for vaccine. And then you have the World Food Programme, which is based in Rome, which is also the UN agency responsible for logistics and aviation, aviation transport. And as a good example of this cooperation and coordination is my own role. I'm employed by the World Food Programme, but I'm sitting in the building of the World Health Organization. The UN agencies, of course, collaborate with external organizations. IATA, an example, the COVAX, Gavi, and all that. So this is not a close. This is like the word cooperation and coordination have been mentioned several times, and it is extremely valid also in this vaccine logistics challenge.
Perfect. Thank you, Pauli. I think planning and preparation are without a doubt is one of the keys to ensure the adequate and efficient distribution of the vaccines. Emir, I want to jump in terms of the airports. It is estimated that Miami Airport will be an important hub for distributing the vaccines to Latin America. How are you preparing for this challenge?
Thank you, Kurt, for that question. And it goes without a doubt, the proper planning and preparedness will be the key factors behind the successful distribution of the COVID-19 vaccine. And without a doubt, Miami will play a pivotal role in the distribution of the vaccines throughout the Caribbean and Latin America, as we know. So in anticipation of this, the Miami International Airport launched a joint task force, which I lead, focused on how we prepare for the air cargo community's greatest logistical challenge of this generation. We began with an internal airport meeting of all the major departments, so operations, planning, security, real estate, marketing, facilities, and outlined an action plan. We followed up with an airport survey to account for all the refrigerated space we have, so we could identify how much pharma cooler space we had versus perishable space. And we also captured the data in cubic meters in case of storage requirements. Finally, we had an airport cargo stakeholders call, where we invited the entire air cargo community to participate. About 80 or so attendees shared their plans and our plans and listened to their concerns. As a result of this initial stakeholders meeting, we were able to identify the airfield parking locations for all Class 4 and 5 cargo aircraft, including the terminal area. These are the large aircraft, the 747, 777 freighter aircraft, and where they can park on our airfield. We reserved land for trucking, parking, staging area in the hard west side cargo area. So in case we need additional parking or a staging area, there is a location identified. We shared the survey results of an on-airport cooling facility, which I mentioned earlier, along with the electrical accommodations necessary for active containers and so forth. We got commitment from the CBP and FDA to work on expediting vaccine shipments with the proper document entries. We also got the commitment from SCBF for vaccine clearance training. We learned about the challenges of dry ice and shipments, distribution, and the need to plan when ordering your dry ice. And we heard from our stakeholders on some of their preparation plans, available facilities, some of the recommendations and so forth that they made, such as forming smaller groups to address particular challenges, the training of staff, the survey of off-airport facilities for cooler space, etc. Along with planning and preparation, this effort will require another very important factor, and that's collaboration. It's been mentioned over and over in today's presentation, but it's something that is critical. The entire supply chain needs to work together and communicate up and downstream along the chain to assure successful transportation of the vaccine. In the end, we're talking about saving people's lives, and that's really what matters here. Thank you.
Thank you, Emir. It's a good message that we are focused here in this webinar to save people's life. This is important that we are working together to do that. Thank you, Emir, for your comments. Ronald, I want to understand from the IATA side, how is IATA helping the airlines to prepare for this great challenge?
Well, first of all, I think, what we need to remember is that the patient safety is everyone's responsibility. So that is, I think, something that should serve us as a guidance here. So we are responsible that people getting these vaccines, they will be getting it in a good manner, in a not harmful manner, so that the quality and product really integrity cannot be jeopardized. So that is something that is really important for us. How do we do that, or what is our contribution on behalf of IATA? Well, number one, building confidence and trust through knowledge, training, and global standards. IATA is a standard-setting organization, so we have been working together with the industry on setting standards and industry standards in the past. We have our own temperature-controlled regulations, which have been developed, and some of the people here in this panel participated in that over the last couple of years. And actually, these regulations now, and we looked at them again, they were recognized that the current provisions and standards in the temperature-controlled regulations manual actually provide the necessary level of information, which makes it appropriate to ship, handle, and transport these temperature-sensitive vaccines. In addition to building this standard, we've actually just 2 days ago launched our IATA guidance, Preparedness for Global Vaccine Distribution. So this is a document which includes recommendations for governments and logistical supply chain operators to prepare them for really what will be. We are one of the largest and most complex global logistics operations. So the key challenges addressed in this guidance materials are the availability of temperature-controlled facilities. It defines as well the roles and responsibilities of the parties involved in the distribution of the vaccines. And it talks about 4 main element points of industry preparedness for the vaccine distribution, which is, we talked about it before, capacity and connectivity, facilities and infrastructure, border management, and security. So we just launched that one 2 days ago. It will continuously updated by our colleagues in Geneva. And you can get it on our website free. You just need to register and you can download it if you're interested in doing that. The other important element is that we're trying to achieve here is quality programs, really continuous improvements, harmonization, collaboration, and alignment within the industry so that everybody works according to the same set of standards. I think many of you participating and the panelists know the CIV Pharma program. It's one of those quality programs. So it really focuses on ensuring that the product integrity is not compromised. And with regards to collaboration, I mean, we would like to see always an approach to harmonized standards. So we work with different stakeholders. We work with individual companies. We work with different companies at different locations. We work with communities as well. Under the CIV Pharma program, we have been able to establish 26 communities around the globe in different parts of the world, Europe, here in the Americas, in Asia. So this is something that we have been working on quite heavily over the last couple of years, and these communities nowadays gain even more and more in importance. And last but not least, I think there's one important element that was highlighted before as well. I think it was Emir. It's about, visibility and capability and what can you really do? What is available? What is out there? So what IATA will soon launch is, it's already up on the website and companies can pre-register. It's our capabilities and infrastructure industry platform. It's called OneSource, and it will allow stakeholders to showcase capabilities and inform the industry about what they are actually capable of doing. So it's really, it will achieve visibility. So companies that are looking for facilities in other places, they can find these facilities and infrastructure places. There's an option to validate that information. So it's not just a marketing possibility, but it's really validated information by our own team, which then will, show the companies what competencies and what expertise is really available at these companies. So you can check it out on the website as well. Pre-registration is on and it will be launched very, very soon. But again, this is something which we hopefully will play a vital role in the upcoming weeks and months of providing that visibility of who are the right stakeholders in the transportation of these pharmaceutical products, and in particular this COVID-19 vaccine.
Perfect. Thank you, Ronald. And for sure, IATA give us the standards and the communications, and obviously try to clarify a lot of doubts or concerns around the current situation and that we have with the vaccines. I think that with all the communication, and recently IATA has published one document related to the COVID-19 vaccines, and IATA helps to all the stakeholders to try to understand where we are with the different areas that is involved in the process. Thank you, Ronald. I want to move to the packaging area with Thomas and Frank. The question is the repositioning of reusable packaging and the increasing demand for the dry ice are also foreseen an important challenge. How are you preparing, and what recommendation do you give to the different stakeholders to face these challenges? I don't know, Thomas, we start with you.
Okay, very good. So this is a really interesting perspective, because soon after it became apparent that the COVID challenge was upon us and the vaccine development began to take center of importance in the media, companies, airlines started reaching out to Envirotainer saying, how will I know that I can get my containers, right? So Envirotainer actually established our COVID-19 task force over 6 months ago. And really the key objectives for this team were to evaluate the inventory levels and to formulate a global network plan on how we were going to meet this demand that was going to come at us basically all at one time. And of course, as I said in my opening statement, the problem is not knowing exactly, what, when, where to make that plan. So we had to make quite a few assumptions, which was terrific. As anybody that works with us knows, we do a great deal of analysis and effort in terms of our demand forecasting. Largely in part that we utilize production schedules and market information and lessee order data in order to not only just monitor, but also to dynamically adjust our inventory levels across our network. And obviously the goal of that is to ensure that the container availability is there. Regardless of how many containers you need, we want to make sure we have all of those containers available and on time to meet the needs of the customers. So just so for comparison, we basically have a container availability average of 99.9%, and that's globally. That's across our entire network. So with the critical importance of the COVID vaccines, we wanted to ensure that we would have the capability to provide that same level for COVID. And of course, part of the challenge is knowing that these vaccines have to go everywhere, right? So what we had determined, we've created contingency plans which will allow us to be very flexible and to react to changing market conditions. One of the benefits of being the largest active container manufacturer in the world is obviously very high inventory levels. And one of the nice parts about it is that after our thorough analysis with this team, we were able to determine that we will be able to not only meet the needs of the COVID demands, but also continue to meet the needs of the standard pharmaceutical product that we consistently move year round as well. So the answer, I think, with this is going to be working with our partners. It's going to be working with obviously our customers to be flexible in order to ensure that we have a successful ability to meet the needs of wherever the vaccines need to go. And to that extent, that's what we're going to do. Now, on to the other component of the question was actually dry ice. You know, a significant component of our containers do use dry ice, obviously, and we know that at least initially, several of the candidates are going to be deep frozen. You know, they're operating in cryo temperatures for some of these vaccines, but based on the list of the top 10 or 12 vaccines, we know that these are ultimately going to be crossing virtually every handling temperature that there is. And so one of the keys to success, I think, when we go back to the ones that are going to need to use dry ice, is with our T2 units, which use dry ice as a coolant. It's very important to develop the appropriate transportation schedule. A transportation schedule is essentially a calculation. It's a calculator that allows you to determine how much dry ice you're going to need. And the reason I bring up the transportation schedule is there is much more to moving these products around than the containers, whether active or passive, in which they reside. There's keeping an accurate accounting of what the in-transit temperatures are going to be, because that directly affects the container and or passive solution performance. And so it's very important when using our transportation schedule for an active container to keep these ambient temperatures at top of mind. Essentially, when you go through all the variables that are on that schedule, it will tell you how much dry ice you need. But if any of those ambient conditions, for example, are different than what you calculated, it can negatively impact your ability to maintain the appropriate temperatures en route. So that's one component of dry ice concerns for this pandemic. The second piece, though, has to do with availability. There are some discussions about potentially having dry ice shortages. And I think at a recent event that Emir's team had in Miami, there was a big discussion about how pre-planning to be able to enable, I should say, the dry ice vendors to meet your need is very important. So be sure to work closely with your dry ice vendors. If you have, as soon as you have the transportation schedule, say for an active dry ice shipment figured out, you want to be talking to them, because that may include re-icing that is going to be needed while en route. You want to share that information with your dry ice vendors so that you can basically communicate and pre-plan those needs. And this will be crucial given what we expect to be very, very high demand for dry ice and the associated potential shortages. But what else should you consider for all of these activities? You know, keeping in mind that as I kind of mentioned a minute ago, both the active and the passive solutions are just one component of an overall successful distribution scheme. We want to make sure other factors that you keep in mind are, for example, with dry ice, safety of flight. Obviously, most carriers have an aircraft capacity limit on how much dry ice they will accept. Make sure you're talking to your providers about that. What are their procedures for handling these shipments around the airport property and or between the aircraft and their warehouses? It's very important to consider those ambient conditions that I mentioned in the transportation schedule for a dry ice container. If a customer, or excuse me, if a provider spends an inordinate amount of time on the ramp, it's important to know that so you can adjust the amount of dry ice accordingly. But basically, all of these types of decisions that you have to make when using these containers and or other solutions will enable those solutions to do their work properly. But you have to take into account things other than just the aircraft transportation. And these questions and understanding of your service providers' processes are deeply important in order to make sure that ultimately things will work the way you expect them to work. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Thomas. And Frank, do you want to add from your side?
Thank you. Yes. So, as we understand, particularly in the Western Hemisphere, or say here in the Americas, you hear a great deal about certain companies, important companies developing the vaccines. But it's important to also note that the vaccine development is happening on all 4 continents. It is truly global. It's not just the transfer or the transport north to south. It's east to west. The -70 Celsius or the -80 Celsius temperature range, which has gotten a great deal of attention, particularly with the messenger RNA or the mRNA method of the vaccines, which very recently has shown some very positive light in terms of their effectiveness, will be, I think, one part of the initial launch, and hence the dry ice, and will be a key component to it. But however, if you look at the more than 49 companies around the world developing vaccines, of which 11 are in final clinical trial phase 3, the data coming back in terms of their stability isn't just at -70 to -80. It's somewhere between -15 to -25. And there's a great deal of data showing that as more companies come online with the vaccines, that there'll be greater stability at 2 to 8. So within that, it's important to note, at least within the passive packaging space, as a complement, as Tom said, to the active, speak with your local companies, speak with your local airport authorities, your logistics companies. Look at using the isothermal packaging, not just between the airport gateways, but truly between, let's say, port to port, from the origin to the destination. But the isothermal or the passive packaging can carry all through to the final mile. That's critical, and particularly for Latin America, the focus of our conference, because there is, let's say, a limited pharma-grade infrastructure across the region in cold rooms at airports. However, there is a great deal of perishable cold chain infrastructure across the majority of the airports. Of course, pharma has to travel within, or has to be cared for within, a GDP compliant, controlled distribution. But there's an opportunity there in the collaboration between all the stakeholders at each major gateway to be able to convert, even if in a temporary fashion, as the massive amounts of vaccines begin to be imported into the countries, to use this existing perishable infrastructure, obviously conditioning it within a GDP framework to be able to receive the massive amounts of vaccines that are coming. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Frank, and thank you for your comments. I think one of the things that I hear is synchronization of the supply chain with the different actors to guarantee that we have the process flows to avoid delays, and obviously, as Thomas mentioned, in terms of planning and transport schedule to guarantee the vaccines arrive with the right temperature at the destinations. Thank you for the second block. Let's move to the third block, more related to our geographical locations, is challenges in Latin America. Now, with the challenge in Latin America, in particular, is we have connectivity, we have some infrastructure, but we have a complex procedures in various territories. I want to explore around this and the different questions. For Pauli and Ronald, I have these questions. Maybe you can start, Ronald. How can these barriers be overcome?
Well, I think in general, as I said before, it is very important to have a harmonized approach. I mean, the logistical, the infrastructure issues is something that probably will not be able to be solved just alone by the industry, but I think it needs some kind of government support as well, especially if you want to reach the rural areas in Latin America, because this is like the last mile delivery as well is going to be a huge challenge, and this cannot be just solved alone. I think for the companies, what I think they need to do first is, I mean, compliance is really important. So if you don't follow the standards that are out there, the guidelines that are being issued by the IATA, by the governments, then you have a problem, and the government will be watching as well, because they want to make sure that we do this properly, that we handle these vaccines properly, because as I said before, if they get spoiled, if they have a temperature excursion, they will not reach their destination, and at the end of the day that will reflect badly on the governments, and you don't want to get in trouble with the government, right? So I think compliance is really one major issue to overcome in Latin America. The stakeholders involved in the transportation need to work according to one standard. They need to continuously improve their handling and transportation of on how they transport pharmaceuticals. That implies as well that they need to focus on quality. So they need to train people very efficiently, and they should not save here. Training people is very important. Pharmaceuticals and vaccines are, first of all, very costly, and second of all, very sensitive. So this is not just another iPhone or Samsung phone that you're transporting. This is very sensitive. So they need to train their people according to the latest standards out there. And they need to implement quality-driven strategies to make sure that whatever they do is really according with those guidelines and standards. What helps very much here is mitigating the risk is really by applying a risk assessment approach. This is not really, and I cannot re-emphasize that enough. I think many companies still are not using a risk approach here. You have to assess your risk of transporting these vaccines. What can go wrong? How highly is the probability? What is the impact? And what backup measures do you have in place if something goes wrong, if there is a temperature excursion? So risk assessments are absolutely important in this area. So, and this applies to everywhere, but in Latin America, it's a huge issue. And they need to apply it. So run a risk assessment of your own operation. Do it continuously. There might be new risks coming up along the line. And work with your stakeholders, work with your partners before and after in the supply chain. This is very, very important. Collaboration is key here. Even though if you do everything right, it doesn't mean that your partner before or after is doing things right. Talk to them, engage with them, make sure that they understand your needs, understand their needs as well. So that is absolutely crucial. So we really need to focus on raising the bar and improving the level of operational technical preparedness. That is something that we can really do. Now, then again, we depend, as I said before, the distribution centers, where they're going to be. Are they ready? Are they not ready? Will the government be involved? Those are things that we need to engage our regulatory authorities as well. If we haven't done that yet, we need to start doing that immediately, because as highlighted before, the vaccines are very near to be ready to get distributed, probably by the end of the year and the next quarter. So that is very, very important for us. And then again, the governments as well. Are they ready? In this particular region, we have some issues with the regulatory authorities as well. They're not always up to par. They need to be, they need to be ready. They need to install measures that allow for fast and quick and efficient transportation. If the vaccines spend hours on the ramp in the heat, it's not going to do them any good. So those are a lot of things that we need to do. But I think if you keep it simple and follow all the guidance materials that are out there, so you are compliant, you implement quality-driven programs, you mitigate your risk by conducting proper risk assessments, you can do quite a lot.
Perfect, Ronald. I take from your comments, anticipate and be prepared for the risk assessment to guarantee that you cover all the topics around this. Thanks, Ronald. Pauli?
I think Ronald covered it very well. There is somehow little to add on it. So of course I could say that please follow all the ICAO annexes and all the IATA TCC manuals and all your companies' SOPs and all the guidance of the pharma industry. So all about compliance and procedures. But I would like to go a step out from that and somehow above. In the aviation and the pharma industry, we are always keen on using our brain, and we also used to be very strict, and we are used to be very firm, and all those values about being strict and firm are very important. However, I think that this is the time for us also not only to have a brain, but also having a heart, not only being strict, but also being flexible and not being too firm, but also friendly. And I'm not trying to say that we need to break some rules and procedures. I just think we need to think out of the box, or maybe ideally we should not have a box at all. I take the example of the freighters that using a passenger plane as a freighter. This was a new idea of the industry. I'm also thinking about some quarantine rule, how a pilot can go to a remote area and come back to his home base by not exceeding the duty hours. Or if he go there and he has to stay 2 weeks in a hotel room, who is bringing the plane back. The COVID situation is so unique in the aviation history that I really trust and believe that we, and when I say we, I mean the authorities, the airlines, the airport, the freight forwarders, should have a correct attitude and the correct approach to the challenge, and that there is a need for using our heart and to be flexible, not to be over bureaucratic or over formal, because that could lead to impossible operation due to the context. And maybe finally, even if the question was Latin America, it's good for all of us to take a global approach. COVID will disappear from planet Earth when it has disappeared from every country. As long as there is one continent which have it, or your neighbor country which have it, you will always be at risk. So a selfish approach will not be the solution to deal with COVID as we know it. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Pauli, for your comments, and Ronald, again, for your comments. Let's try to move with the next questions for Thomas. Thomas, how can the active packaging solution industry mitigate this infrastructure and process deficiencies in the region?
Yeah, so I think one of the benefits is we all are very well aware of the infrastructure challenges that exist in Latin America. I mean, it depends. If you're in a large city with a hub airport, usually there's not as much of a challenge. We've spent a lot of time working with those airports in order to make sure that they can properly handle the equipment. But it's when you get beyond, I think earlier someone else mentioned the distribution warehouses and the last mile, we start seeing a little bit more of a challenge. And I think that the active solution is really beneficial for this type of process, particularly if the shipment encounters any type of regional challenges due to delays or missing infrastructure. So, for example, the E-Tech that we provide, which are non-dry ice containers, those, for example, it's an autonomous way to provide protection for these valuable vaccines. As long as there's an ability to charge the unit, it's essentially can be autonomous forever, right? I mean, up to obviously to a point, but the only requirement is we plug them in to recharge the internal batteries. But again, to come back to something I mentioned earlier, I need to reemphasize the fact that the solutions that are utilized, whether active or other, it's only one piece of the puzzle. This is where we get back to the collaboration components. It is very, very important that when building your transportation plan, that you want to basically collaborate with every single partner within that transportation supply chain. This webinar, for example, is a fantastic example of that, because Avianca was able to bring together numerous perspectives in order to help all of us better understand and help engage these issues more fully. So I encourage you, when you're developing your plan if you're developing an SOP for a specific lane, for example, you want to go beyond the airport transportation. You want to talk to everybody from the manufacturing point, if not before, if there's raw materials, but from the manufacturing point all the way to the patient. Talk to them about what they need. Agree in the SOP to all of the roles and responsibilities, regardless of what piece of that supply chain you're managing, so that everybody understands what everybody else is doing. If you expect that, oh, I'm sure they've got that handled. Well, that's bad. You don't want to do that. You want to make sure that you've all agreed to what everybody's doing so that none of the pieces are dropped. Obviously, the patients, the whole reason we're doing this is for the patients. And so it's truly something we cannot allow to have a piece of the puzzle fall en route. And it's the way to make sure that we maintain proper control of these delicate medications. Thank you.
Perfect, Thomas. Thanks for your comments. And Frank, from the chassis packaging solution industry.
Yes, I'd like to add and applaud Pauli for bringing in heart. I think we as an industry have to be unselfish with the knowledge that we hold. And on a daily basis, I'm involved with the COVID vaccine transportation or distribution in some form in Europe, in the US, in China, in Russia, in India. And what amazes me is the lack of cold chain pharma type knowledge at desk level in many countries of many types of companies that are involved in the carriage of this. I love the word compendium. For those of you who know me, I like to use it a great deal. So I would say compendium and proliferation. We have got to be unselfish with the knowledge, the data, the intellectual capital that this group here has, and make sure we spread this out in an unselfish manner at the ground level, at the countries, to understand either the airports or the seaports, the logistics operators, the domestic distribution companies. So the final mile component is going to be critical. The international large scale volume of air between the major ports gets a great deal of attention, but the final mile is critical, getting it to the hospitals, to the clinics, and to the smaller cities. It's important that what we began here, Kurt, Avianca, the rest of your team, how do we take it to ground level? In the forwarding business, we call it desk level. Share this knowledge, make sure that we take this discipline unselfishly, even extend ourselves, volunteering, to get it to desk level, because that's still within Latin America, that's the significant challenge that I see on a daily basis. In terms of the isothermal packaging or the passive, make sure that you, whoever's on this call today or in our meeting, make sure that you're exhausting all of the companies that are out there, not just Emballiso, all of the competitors, and exhaust the solutions, because we're going to need as many as we possibly can. Oh, an example of something that we're doing at Emballiso is working with ocean carrier container companies to utilize their reefers as temporary storage between the interchange of the pallets or the large scale amounts of pallets from the import gateway as they're held while they're being nationalized through the customs broker process, held temporarily in reefers, because there is a challenge throughout the region of pharma grade service, and then use those to go from the large cities out to the smaller ones. It's important that what we begin today, that we take it to each country, form task forces. And what I hope is that this is an initiative that we will continue across all the countries of the region. Because as I read every day, I sit here in the US and we have a third wave of contagion. Europe has it also. Businesses are starting to shut down. Obviously, patient life is the most important, but the macroeconomic effects of shutting our economies down are causing some really long-term issues. So this has to be the most important priority for any company in our space, to get these life-saving drugs as fast as possible to those patients who need them. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Excellent comments. I think that this is part of our intention with this webinar, to not only use the word collaboration, if not as well to educate, because we have an important role to supply the vaccines to different countries in Latin America, and we part of the different stakeholders in this process. Thanks for the comments. Our last question in this third block in Latin America, Emir, I want to understand and what good practices can the Miami airport recommend to other Latin American airports?
Thank you for that question, Kurt. I'm sure many of my colleagues in Latin America have been thinking about this particular challenge and have come up with their own ideas and plans on how to best tackle the situation at their airport. But I would like to suggest a simple formula. It's actually a formula that I saw on an IATA webinar not too long ago. And it's plan, prepare, inform, and I added do. So plan, start planning. If you haven't started planning, you need to start immediately. You need to assign and dedicate staff to the planning and coordination of this effort. Research and analyze information related to the vaccine. Map out your airport's facilities and infrastructure. Contact the federal agencies, the cargo stakeholders, the local regional government, and align your plans. And discuss alternative plans for processing and the clearance of the vaccine. Prepare. Prepare your airport and cargo community for the challenges ahead. Inventory your electrical grid. Train staff in the proper handling of pharma shipments. If possible, invest in upgrading your cooler or other infrastructure. It's been mentioned several times about the lack of having proper equipment to offload aircraft. This is something that needs to be considered, and if you haven't done it, it needs to be looked at. Align truck parking routes and maximize the efficiency of those routes, that last mile that we were talking about. Work with local, state, and federal security authorities to limit the theft and the counterfeit efforts by nefarious figures. Thirdly, inform. Communicate with your community and inform them of your plans. Have regular scheduled meetings, calls, webinars, etc. Use social media outlets if that is the preferred form of communication. Call other airports and share your challenges and how you met them. Remember, collaboration is key to success. Finally, do. Just do it. Implement your plan and adapt to the particulars of your situation. We will never have all the right answers to every challenge, but we need to execute and move forward. I would also like to add one final thought. IATA Farmer.Aero, as part of Project Sunrays, will be publishing a white paper report on the recommendations of the optimal transportation of the COVID-19 vaccine sometime in early December. This report will be public and provide another source of information for best practices for the air cargo industry. This will be similar to IATA's report that was just recently released, but with a different focus. So I encourage those that are looking for additional information to take a look at this publication when it is available. Thank you very much.
Perfect, Emir. Thank you. And for sure, we're checking as well the IATA information. Okay. Thanks for our panelists for these 3 blocks with the different questions. We receive a lot of questions in our chat. I'm going to take some of them. The rest we try to answer after the webinar. But I want to start with some of questions. Pauli, we received one question related. What are the main variables that we need to be considered for the planning of the vaccines distribution?
Kurt, can you say again the first word on the planning of the distribution of vaccine? What was the question?
Yeah, the question, what are the main variables that...
I believe the main variable is really the temperature, because the temperature will affect the amount of dry ice or phase change gel or whatever cooling agent we will use, whether electrical or chemical, and we the size of the aircraft. That will affect whether you can rely on passive solution and whether you can use passenger freighter and so on and so on. So it's really the temperature.
Perfect. Thank you, Pauli. Emir, we received one questions related to Miami Airport. The Miami Airport organized a cargo stakeholder meeting for the airport community preparedness. Will there be more of these sessions in the future?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Yes, absolutely. We're actually in the process of planning the next meeting in early December to discuss the latest updates on the vaccine and to share additional information on how the distribution will take place, and particularly in the United States. I'm also waiting to get an update on the dry ice challenge of our community, which is quite large. Just an interesting note, there's actually no manufacturing of dry ice in the state of Florida. We get our dry ice from Georgia. So obviously there's a consideration there when you plan out your dry ice needs in the future. But it's important to make sure that you do that planning properly so that our community doesn't face any shortages in the months to come. So these are the things that we're kind of tackling locally, and the idea is that we will have probably these types of meetings probably every 1 or 2 months as we move forward, more if necessary. The big next thing that we're waiting for is actually the approval of the vaccines that have been announced. And then after that, the distribution starts in either late this year or early next year, and then we're going to really get into it. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Emir. Emir, when you talking about the infrastructure facilities in Miami Airport, we received one question. One of the concerns related to the distribution of the vaccine is exceeding the cool room capacities of the airport. How the Miami Airport is?
I'm sorry, Kirk, could you repeat the last part? You broke up.
No problem. The question that I received is one of the concerns related to the distribution of the vaccines is exceeding the cool room capacity of the airport. How is the Miami Airport preparing for this?
Yeah, thank you. Okay, as previously mentioned, we conducted a survey of our cool space infrastructure at the airport, and we found out a few things from that recent survey. First, it provided an accurate amount of both pharma cooling space. We have approximately 8,294 square meters, and we have approximately 368,064 square meters of perishable or non-pharma cooling space available. So as we also know how much space we have in cubic meters in case there is the need for storage. Now, optimally, this is not something we want to do at the airport, but if the need does arise due to an aircraft on the ground, for example, and the aircraft has to be unloaded, we need to know where we can store the vaccines and how much we can store. So obviously knowing this is very important. We've also taken into account off-airport cooling facilities. So, it's not just at the airport because it's really not the optimal location to store vaccines. It's better off-airport, and we're in the process of doing a survey to account for the space off-airport. But knowing how much cooler space you have on the airport is really only part of the story. You also need to know the type of electrical capacity your airport warehouse facilities have available, the number of electrical plugs for active containers, for example. Backup generators is something very important, electrical gate capacity, etc. It's also important to know if your airport's ground handlers can lease reefer trucks to supplement warehouse cooler space, or instead of the warehouse cooler space. So supplementing it with a reefer. Where you can park these reefers, do they have power in close proximity? And do you have backup generators for the reefers, for example? All these things we're taking into account right now to make sure that we have not only the proper space that we've accounted for, but that we have the proper backup infrastructure in place to make sure that we're prepared for the distribution of the vaccine. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Emir. And related to electrical supply for the Envirotainers, I want to jump to Thomas. 2 questions. One is, do airports in Latin America have the necessary power and grid or electrical network to handle shipments with a great number of active electrical containers? Emir mentioned the electrical supply is a key.
Yeah, so I alluded to this a moment ago. Again, we have worked over the years with airport authorities across the globe, but particularly in Latin America, with the key airports and authorities to ensure that they have the infrastructure and correct setup, necessary to support the proper handling of our containers, namely the plugins, the electrical circuits needed to be able to recharge, for example, the E-Tech. So we've done a good job of that. I think what you will find is that, as an example, I was in Brazil a year or two ago, and at one point I saw well over 100 containers plugged in within the inbound warehouse. So it was quite staggering to see that many plugged in at one time. But I think if you go to a GRU or Bogota or EZE, if you go to all the big airports, I think you'll find that there is not an issue. What I would ask you to do, though, in terms of the collaborative approach, is if you're going to be moving any of these devices, of these containers, to a smaller airport, a regional type airport, or even smaller than that, get with that airport specifically to determine what their capabilities are. Because I think where you'll find the further away you get from a large airport, the more concerning it could be. So, again, major airports should not be an issue. Just make sure you work through the process with any other airports. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you, Thomas. Frank, related to passive packaging, I have one question. Can passive packaging ensure the different temperature range that might be required for the vaccine transportation, and for how long?
Yes, thank you. There have been significant advancements with phase change material, or what we're today referring as advanced PCM. And PCM today can easily sustain temperatures of -20 C. In the case of Emballiso, we are capable to do -30, -40, and we've even tested a -70 to -80, particularly for the first launch of that of the messenger RNA vaccine method. In the -70 to -80, we've only reached about 102 hours. So the industry needs something in the neighborhood of 120 hours to 144 hours. But we're confident we'll get there. There are a few other companies that are also or that can reach those temperature thresholds. So today, in combination with advanced vacuum panel in a pallet shipper mode with advanced PCM, it is feasible to hold from -20, -30, and -40 C for anywhere from 144 hours to 168 hours without temperature control necessarily along the distribution route, and obviously being much easily done at the 2 to 8 C, which eventually, as the stability data comes out, yesterday, one of the two companies that shared their final results from their clinical trials initially had posted or had communicated that their temperature was going to be within -70 to -80, but the data is coming back that the stability can be done at -15 to -25, and there's even some stability at much shorter time frames that it could hold at 2 to 8. So the PCM phase change material, advanced PCM, has significantly advanced over the last years, and I think out of the necessity to service the tens of thousands of shipments that are going to be flowing on a monthly basis, if not hundreds of thousands, if you really look at the 150 countries around the world who are part of the WHO and the COVAX vaccine distribution program, it is going to take the active, the hybrid, and the passive working together to be able to provide that kind of capacity. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Frank, and thanks for your answer. So we receive a lot of questions. I'm going to read the last questions and try to answer the other offline of the webinar. But Ronald, the last question for this session is, the airline industry in general has been heavily affected by the COVID-19 crisis. Does IATA have an estimate regarding when will be the industry back to where it was in 2019?
Well, let me take a look at my crystal ball, right? The big question for all. No, we have some great colleagues in our Geneva office who continuously work on updating the traffic forecast that we have been publishing over the last couple of months. I mean, the evolution is still uncertain. I think we're fully aware of that, but we see that there are like 4 drivers really that underline, the traffic development over the next couple of months. I mean, first of all, what course will the pandemic take? How will it develop over the next couple of months? Frank mentioned the 3rd wave here in the United States. Europe is on lockdown. Other parts of the world are affected. So that will really have an impact, of course, on capacity. The second one, which has an impact on capacity as well, is policy by the government. So what will they do? How will they continue to handle this pandemic? What kind of measures are they going to adopt? Are they going to force other lockdowns? Here in the United States, there's a lot of talk about lockdowns in the upcoming weeks and months. As I mentioned, Europe just did it again. So that will have a lot of influence on capacity, on how traffic will develop as well. Then again, the impacts as well on the micro and macroeconomic level will play a role here. On the microeconomic level, like how will air travel spending change? Will people still be in a position to travel more, or will they travel less? How will the economy develop? I mean, a good economy usually fosters air travel. A bad economy usually does not. So where do we see the traffic development over the next couple of months, and when do we see recovery levels? Well, our colleagues came up that the global air passenger traffic is expected to return to its 2019 levels around 2023 in the best case. Medium case, worst case, 2024, 2025. And that is pretty much in line as well of what we see here in Latin America, and South America at least. We expect we expect to see those 2019 levels to see again in probably 2023. But again, if the recovery is not fast, if some of these factors that I mentioned do not have a positive impact, then the recovery in the region could take much longer. So right now, somewhere in between 2023, 2024. But of course, we hope that we will do this, we will see recovery sooner than that. And our colleagues in Geneva will probably soon come up with another update on where they see this going. They do this, I think, almost on a quarterly basis. So stay tuned, and hopefully for better news.
Thank you, Ronald. And we hope we recover soon as well. This is industry. So we receive a lot of questions. To all questions that are not answered today, we'll make sure that you receive the answer via email, with the email that you register in or use for this webinar. For the conclusions, first of all, thank you very much for all the panelists. Key messages that we use a lot of these words in this webinar is collaboration. Collaboration is key in this moment. And this is our first Avianca Cargo Pharma webinar. For sure, we will continue with this kind of webinars in the future, because when we more interact with the different stakeholders, when we educate, when we anticipate, as Emir mentioned, when we prepare the risk assessments, as Ronald shared with us, we'll be more prepared to guarantee that we have a key role and supply all the vaccines for Latin America. From Avianca Cargo, it was a pleasure to all the attendees and this webinar. We continue with this kind of session in the future, but I want to thank for our 5 panelists, and obviously all the attendees to the webinar. Thank you very much, and keep in touch. Stay safe. Thank you. Bye.